Hello and welcome. This is Working Class to World Class. But before we go any further, I do have a little favour of you. If you could hit that follow or subscribe button, then that would be a massive help. Thank you. In this episode, I chat with a once working class kid who grew up in Amsterdam. He went on to build a business that has become the envy of the media world. Breaking through the barriers of adversity. I'm Lynn Lester, and this is Working Class to World Class. So Wesley, brilliant catching up. Thank you for coming on Working Class to World Class today.
Fun to be here. When you told me the title, I was like, that sounds amazing.
Oh, brilliant. Well, hopefully you'll be saying that at the end of the chat, which I'm sure you will. So the whole kind of premise of this podcast is all about the kind of rags to riches story, the underdogs. On paper, it should never have really happened for you, but somehow it did through osmosis, through the way of life, through your choices. So we're going to go back in time in a wee second, but for now, could you describe to everyone who's tuning in, bearing in mind there's some people that won't be from, or many people that won't even be from the industry that we're in, How would you describe who you are today?
So I'm Wesley. I founded Media Monks 23 years and 4 months ago. And Media Monks now is a global advertising and marketing organization that sort of competes with what we traditionally call the Big Six, the big advertising networks like WP and Publicis. But comes from more humble beginnings. Really, initially the excitement of a new creative channel almost, and a communication channel, and we built it through a bunch of different versions over the last 2 decades plus. But yeah, I now co-CEO the content piece of that organization. Have been on the board of S4, who's sort of the overarching stock listed part of our team. And try and figure out what's next in our industry.
So as you said, obviously, I mean, this is huge. So for people tuning in, let's not underestimate the scale of your business. It's a pretty impressive beast. But as you say, it started off like really humble beginnings. But before we even get to that, I want people to get a sense of you as a person.
Yes.
So let's talk about you, right? So where were you born?
Born and raised in Amsterdam, 45 now, but with an English mother from Manchester. So sort of grew up, at least, if not fully, in two cultures, at least very much attached to English culture as well.
Yeah, God, you're 45. Do you know you're the same age as me? I didn't know that. Not that I'm surprised, but I just didn't realise that.
We both look amazing. Great skincare.
Well, it's a Scottish water for me. So you were born in Amsterdam. So you were saying your mum's from Manchester. Was your dad from Amsterdam?
Yeah, local. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And what about siblings? Like, who was in the family?
Only child. And not actually a really big family on my mother's side, like lots of nephews and nieces in the UK, but a small family on the Dutch side. So yeah, a small group.
Small.
Yeah, and only child, which I'm sure explains a million things, but
Oh, well, we'll interrogate that in a
yeah.
minute. So life in Amsterdam, I mean, I've never been to Amsterdam for a start, so I need to sort that out because I need to go just as a sort of trip and explore it. But what's it like? Like, what was it like for you growing up there?
Yep, amazing. And also, it's so close. Why have you not made it down? That's a different conversation. But yeah, great place to grow up. Grew up for people that know Amsterdam, in west of Amsterdam, the old West piece. And it was your typical sort of play football outside endlessly, try and light things on fire, which you tend to do if you're a young boy. And just lots of time outside, like massive amounts of time outside. But yeah, working class neighborhood, working class, maybe some parts lower middle class was sort of the area.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know what it's like. As I say, I've never been to Amsterdam. Like in the UK, for me, typically like Glasgow. So working class to me is about, as you say, it's about playing in the streets. I mean, that's every kid, right? Regardless of
Yeah.
class. But it's like parents that had kind of jobs that maybe didn't pay top dollar. it was we didn't really go on any holidays, maybe to Butlins or Blackpool. What was it like for you? Is it similar?
Yeah, we don't necessarily have our butlins. I've heard of it though. But the what we the standard would be get in a car and drive to France, pretty much, or sometimes go to Spain, and then just spend 2 to 3 weeks in one of those locations. I mean, my dad was a taxi driver, cabbie. They did pretty decently at that time. It's like pre the Ubers of the world. So we weren't, uh, yeah, we did fine. Um, but yeah, very different city, right? If you look at Amsterdam now, and even if you look at that neighborhood, it's sort of crazy. Our current office in Amsterdam sits in what used to be the Wood Harbor, and I grew up across from that, and just to see how that whole space went from industrial to like a super high end, sort of upper middle class, higher class region of Amsterdam. It's sort of crazy to see how much change has happened in the last 2 decades.
I mean, I can imagine. Do you ever sit there and look out the window? And so, obviously, as you say, you're reminiscing about where you grew up. Do you ever have a pinch yourself moment where you think, I used to live here as a working class kid, and now I run a business that rivals the top six biggest advertising agencies in the world?
Yeah, well, when I was back in Amsterdam, because I moved to the US and then Mexico City for work starting about 9 years ago, almost 10 years. So I wasn't spending a lot of time back in Amsterdam until COVID, where we ended up going back home, closer to family, and just, I guess, at that time thinking we'll spend about 3 months in Amsterdam and then we'll be back on the road. And it turned into a year and a half, and that created a few of those moments where you would walk around your old neighborhood and get a sense for the change. And that was, yeah, that was like an interesting sort of moment of recognition. But beyond that, I don't think about it too much, mostly.
You don't. You're too modest, and having known you for over the years, I can see that you are still a really humble person to this day. But I do want to dig a little bit deeper into your childhood because I think a lot of the things that happen when you're younger, I firmly believe it sets you up for who you become in today's world. I mean, I think that kind of goes without saying. It's quite an obvious thing, Lynn. But when you were growing up, you were saying like, you would jump in the car, you would go on your holidays, you were an only child. But although your mum and dad were doing all right, because as you say, just the pre-Uber, series, what what was life like in terms of privilege? So like, you weren't multimillionaires, you weren't like upper class. What was life like? What did you have to maybe go without, or did you not think about it?
Yeah, I think if you grow up in the setting, you don't really notice it. I started noticing it when I started going to, I guess the high school is the equivalent, where you're like 14 or something. You start going to different schools because I went from going to like a neighborhood school where everybody was of the same class, was very diverse setting. Like you grow up with lots of people from different cultures, and then I went to a school that was probably a little higher, and it was on the edge of town, closer to some of the villages. And yeah, the diversity level went down, the cultural uh, cohesion went up, and I in that setting I started to feel some of the difference because you would have kids that would have clearly more money to spend and higher. I guess you would get allowances, or I would have a Saturday job, and the rest was just coasting along on not having to work. So that was really the first time that I got a sense of I guess class almost, which was maybe made me a little probably made me a little more competitive during that time. Where I'm like, oh wait a minute. So yeah, that was I think the first moment I really saw that.
Yeah, it's funny, isn't it? It's not until you see it around you because, as you say, when you grow up, you just know what you know, and nothing's
Yeah.
you're not worse off. It's just how you live your life, and that's just how everybody around you lives it. But when you start seeing those differences, you then get, I guess, a bit more intrigued. And did the kids at your school make you feel any different? Or because I know certainly in the UK, kids are pretty cruel, but I don't know
Yeah.
what it's like over in Amsterdam.
kids probably are the same in most situations. What was strange, honestly, was probably the weirdest thing. Because if you're from Amsterdam, and especially from the neighborhoods I'm from, you have quite a pronounced accent. And that I think I was the only person, or maybe there was one other, born and raised in those classes. And definitely the accent was a good and a bad thing. Sometimes it made you be perceived as cooler than you really were. So you're like a big city person. But it was also sometimes something that would get made fun of. And yeah, you did feel like a bit of a bystander or outsider sometimes because of that. And I can remember going through that, which probably is just, I guess, puberty in general, but maybe losing a little confidence in the early years and then having to sort of fight because I was very boisterous and loud and confident and all of those things on the school I used to go to in my sort of local neighborhood. And then it took me a while, I think, to get that sense back, which I do think is part of it. Like if you having friends now that come from and colleagues that come from different backgrounds, I think you sometimes have a higher sense of confidence or self-worth sometimes. And yeah, you have to sort of go through that process a little bit. So yeah, I can remember that being strange to sort of see.
Yeah. Yeah, and I guess that's where you're sort of coming into contact with the world, the true world, not just your little bubble that you've grown up in.
Yeah.
And so at school, were you good at school? Like what were you kind of like academically?
Yeah, I was definitely decent. So on the local school, I got to go to like the system here is a little. Honestly, it's not great because you go through a few steps to get a definition of what school you can go to, and most people go to like a typical school that sort of sets you up, I guess, for a laborer type job or something that might be a little higher but lower level job in the sort of white collar world or a labor situation. I was good enough at that level academically to be able to go to a different school, which sort of set you up for, I guess, a middle class, higher middle class path. But I was the only one from my group that got to go to one of those schools. So I also, then you have to leave your friends behind, and yeah, it was interesting. And then there, I was okay. I wasn't like a top performer, but I had my moments. Uh, and actually ended up doing quite well. I was a year younger than everybody else partly because of date of birth, but then also was able to keep going class to class. I actually did an extra year before going to college because otherwise I would have been super young. And I thought I was going to be a little too young. So I was like, I'll sit around for an extra year here and do like an extra level and completely botched that. Didn't had no more interest really. So that was like almost a year of truancy before going to college. But yeah, I was decent. I was decent.
Okay, and then you were saying you from there you then went on to college, is that right?
Yes, but so sat around for a year. Was still very young. I think was still 17 and most people were 18, 19. But was very much had no idea what to do. And there are two studies that are sort of the stereotype of the things you choose to do if you have no idea. One is go into law, and one is go into communications. And I did one onboarding session at law school. I was like, this is not for me. Sat through half of the session. I was like, okay, that's not the one. And then ended up going into comms, communications, and picking a school that was very focused on practical internships. So went to a school, it was called Co-op. I'm not sure if it still exists, but it was a cool concept where you did 4.5 years, but a year and a half of that was work. Because I was definitely sort of ready to start doing stuff.
Yeah. Did you know your school must have been a lot posher than mine? Because where I was from, we never ever had anything called communications. I had no idea what that even meant. Like it was never a word that was used at school. You basically went in to do office jobs, or as you say,
Yeah.
sort of trades or different things like that. I'm just rubbish at DIY, so that was never ever going to be me. And so I went and done what was classed as business, although I chucked it after 1 year before I get thrown out of uni because I just wasn't going to class. I
No,
got so bored.
I just loved reading and writing. Like that was always, I used to read endlessly. And actually, my mother started buying me a book every month or every 2 months. We'd go to WH Smith here in Amsterdam, would buy an English book, and would read that, and that sort of became. I think it was probably early teens when we started doing that. So I was just always a massive reader, loved writing. So it just felt like I had no idea how you would get into anything that was real work through that. It was just something where I'm like, at least I enjoy broadly what that feels like you'd be doing. So yeah, it was not based on anything more than just that, really.
Yeah. I mean, I meant to ask you, what did your mum do? Because your dad was a taxi driver. What about your mum?
Well, when I was young, like super young, she was working in hotels as a cleaning lady. I think she did some of the. You've never been to Amsterdam, but we have the canals, of course, and you would have the tour boats, and she would do some of the. Because as a native English speaker, she would sort of tell the tourists to look left or right, depending on what was there. And then after a while, she stay-at-home mom for most of what I remember from my youth.
Yeah, it was the same as my mum. Like my mum stayed at home. I'm the youngest of seven kids, so not an only child for sure. But although by the time I was born, it felt a bit like that. And so again, my mum stayed at home, and I used to love the whole coming home from school or whatever, and my mum was just there because I think we underestimate how much comfort that gives you. I mean, that wasn't me as a working mum for sure.
Yeah,
I was never there
yeah,
because I could, I had to work. So yeah, no, there's something quite nice and actually a really important role because it's not easy.
yeah,
It's a lot of work.
yeah, yeah. Oh, I'm sure I was a handful.
Well, you were saying you were boisterous, so I mean maybe we'll get into
Yeah.
that. And so then you went to college, right? You've obviously done this communications course. Like, where did that then sort of, is that kind of when the Media Monks idea triggered you, or like talk me through the phases from there to then when you sort of had this idea?
Yeah, it was so I picked that really as nothing more than you have to do something. So this seems like a relatively fun thing to do. And then so we're talking in 96, 97, I think there or thereabouts. And what really started happening at that moment in time was the sort of consumer breakthrough here in the Netherlands from the internet. So suddenly you would have a modem and you would have dial-up internet, and it was very much like ICQ. I'm not sure if you still remember that. Lots of chat rooms, and it was very much just a new way, the completely new medium. I think people that didn't go through that might not quite get how different it was than what used to be the case. Because this is pre-mobile phones, even, right? There's just it mind-blowing sort of moment. And then what was happening? I was studying communications, and really, I guess for marketing jobs, right? Internal marketing manager type stuff. And of course, the school is a little slow when it comes to innovation, and the innovation was happening really quickly. So it just felt like the gap was widening. Like you were going to classes that felt very old-fashioned suddenly, and then there was no real way to, which is normal for the school, to bring that in mid-semester or mid-class. And you just ended up, all of us honestly, ended up just in classes behind the laptops, just or computers, massive computers, just being in chat rooms and messing around with the internet. Um, and that very quickly just became something I wanted to be more involved in, together with a good friend of mine, who we started Media Monks with. And I can remember, I think the breaking point was I'd done an internship for it was fine for like a typical junior assistant marketing manager type gig. And then for my next internship, I wanted to start an internet company. Um, and it just wasn't allowed. Like I wasn't allowed to do something for myself or try and do something for myself, which is honestly probably the correct decision. But that sort of spun up about 6 months where I couldn't go to class and I didn't have an internship and I just had to wait for the next year to start. And that's really the impetus of Media Monks. Taught myself how to code really badly. Locked Me and my friend locked ourselves just in his apartment. I was still living with my parents. He had his own apartment, and we just coded and made stuff for like 3 4 months. And that spun up work. Like you would suddenly get friends and families wanted stuff. But yeah, it all came out of that sort of moment where the school couldn't really support that yet, and I was just so interested in it, and that sort of split it off into this path.
Wow. So did you kind of set this up as just a sort of thing to do, or had you actually set it up with the intention this will be a business?
Well, like a lot, that's often the question you get asked, right? What was the plan or some grand strategic vision? But that was very much not what happened. So we started with a little, just me and my friend just making stuff, and we put like a little uh, um, business is a big word, but we had like a business bank account and an official registration, but that takes like half a day and like $80. We're like, we're a business. We started doing paid work, uh, mostly for friends and family, but then we started getting a little real work, and then we actually got headhunted by this is 2000, maybe 1999, 2000. We got headhunted by a startup because this is like the bubble, right? Everybody was starting internet companies, and we spent a year and a half working for that company, um, which had its own weird story. We almost had like a big. Everybody was becoming an internet millionaire at that time. We almost had our version of that. Um, but strange story, we would have had way too much money at too young an age. It would have been very bad. And then when that fell through, we started Media Monks in 2001. So we did like 6 months of working for friends and family, probably a year and a half as part of this startup. And I think at that moment in time, our main takeaway was, oh, we saw somebody else run a company and we thought that doesn't look too difficult, or at least they're not doing the things that we would do. We should start our own company. And that was really it. There was no bigger strategy than that. And that's where Medium started in 2001, pretty much.
Wow. And so I'm quite interested, like when you were at college, when you had that break and you decided to sort of create the $80 business or whatever,
Yes.
what did you call it? And then when you were saying you were doing paid work, like what kind of things? So yeah, what was the name and what were you actually doing?
We called it web exploitation, exploiting the new medium of the web. Uh,
Nice.
Um, and we were doing like this was we were doing like it's so old school flash flyers. So back in the day, Flash was a way for you to sort of put graphics and animation on the web. That really wasn't that well, not even easy, wasn't really possible in other ways at that moment. So it was like this huge unlock for online creativity. Got a very bad rap later on, but at that moment, I think really opened the web up to artists and creatives and designers in ways that was super exciting. And what you used to be able to do was package those animations in an executable file and email them to people because there was people would still open random attachments. So we would do flash flyers. We'd make these cool animations for like events and parties and that type of stuff, and then they would be emailed out to like 100,000 people who would look at your work. So it was, yeah, it was promotional animation stuff. and some websites like, yeah, learned how to code badly, but learned how to code. So yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's really cool. And from then you were saying you then got approached. You maybe or almost had your kind of multi-million pound dollar opportunity, which didn't quite happen for all the right reasons. But I guess then that's where you get a taste for it, right? Because you're like, God, this is what could possibly be. Was that was it the money? Was it your trigger, or was it the
No,
passion, or what was it?
yeah, it wasn't the money. I think what triggered it is it was like one of those weird internet deals that were happening at that time where companies that did something that looked interesting just got bought for a lot of money. And we'd done a virtual tour system. And then we were quite far down conversations with a big real estate organization that was gonna launch on the web, and we already had like a framework and a system for it. But what the real trigger was, we were very young, but I think maybe overconfidence of youth. We were looking at that process, going, "Oh, we're making the wrong decisions. We should do it like this. We should do it like this." But we had like a small percentage of that company as part of the headhunting piece, but we had no decision making power. So we looked at that and we looked at it go wrong. And it wasn't that we were banking on the money. We thought it was strange anyway, because the thing we'd made we didn't think was that special. But we mostly went, oh, okay, we could be better at running a business than the people doing it, which again I think is mostly youth going, we can do that. So we started it really just to do our own thing. Like not a lot of people know. I don't think a lot of people at MediaMonks currently know. When we started the company, it was called MediaMonks Interactive Art. So it was very creative, very artsy, very experimental. So very much not a money play, because we were literally just making digital art for brands, which was amazing, was super fun. But yeah, money definitely wasn't part of that decision.
Yeah, and I always think it's a bit karma, isn't it? Like if you don't always set out to make money, and if it comes good, then actually it was meant to be, and it was all for the right reasons. Like Media Monks itself, like, why did you choose that name?
So there was a few pieces to it. So at that time, most of the I guess futuristic media and movies and anime and all those things came from the East, came from Japan, came from Korea. South Korea at the time had amazing digital design skills and talent. So we wanted something that felt a little futuristic. And then we wanted something, and this is where the hubris comes in. At that time, a lot of companies were naming themselves E something or I something. So it was a lot of I for internet type stuff. And we were like, but we're not just the internet. We are all of media. So we wanted something with media in the name, and something that felt a little connected to the more sort of futuristic culture. And then initially we were going to call it Bonsai Media, which the joke now, of course, is I'm happy we didn't do that, because it would have been very difficult to grow a company called Bonsai Media. But we couldn't get the domain name. Like at that time, it was very much about getting the right domain name. And then couldn't get it. And I can remember watching a 70s kung fu movie, and we were just obsessed by those movies. And that's where we came up with, oh, Media Monks. Has a nice ring to it. It was sort of based a bit on 70s kung fu movies, a little bit of Wu-Tang Clan, like 36 Chambers album, which we were huge fans of. So it sort of came together via those things, and then just ended up sounding really cool. International name, which we really wanted. And then for at least 5 years, the Dutch market, anytime we would have a meeting, somebody would call us Media Monkeys. I would go, no, It's not monkeys, it's monks. So we were very proud with our international name, but it took a while for people to get it locally.
I mean, what a story. And, from then, it starts out with this little kind of small company,
Yeah.
and then, just organically it grows and it grows. And are you kind of at any point in a bit of like disbelief that it's growing as rapid, or did you always think it would?
No, so I think a lot of the growth happened almost, I'm going to say by accident. Like we were a very small team for the first years. We only had, I think, 4 or 5 of us. And we were doing really cool stuff, but it wasn't a business. And then a few things happened. So, starting in 2001, for people with a bit of background, like that was the year that the internet crashed as like a commercial reality, right? It was bubble burst. So there was very little interest in the internet. It took until about 2004 for us to see local companies start using it again for advertising. And Victor Knaap, who's still my partner in MediaMonks, had joined as like a more commercially focused person. So having him be part of the company and that sort of upswing meant we started suddenly becoming a company with real work. And then the growth happened almost without us thinking about it. Because there's an interview from the first few years where I think I said we never want to be bigger than 10 people. And then I think we were like 50 within a few years suddenly, and then 80, and then 100. And it probably took us a while to understand. Like it was so weird hiring your first adult person, like a person that has a mortgage, or people with that have kids. You're like, oh fuck, this is no longer just us playing around. We have this responsibility now. Like people are, their livelihood now depends on us not fucking it up. And that was like this moment where like, oh my God, okay. What is it?
Yeah.
How do you run a business? What does a business do? And then yeah, that made it like a very different moment, which probably started happening more around 2006 is where I think it became a business.
Geez, I mean that is a big responsibility because to your point, you sort of you're mucking about, you're doing what you like, you're working with your mates, and then suddenly people rely on it because if they don't have it, then you're going to screw up their lives basically.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that is quickly having to grow up and learn how to do things properly.
Yeah, and there was also there's a bit of existential dread around that moment because I can remember like we were a company, and I think that there's maybe a little there's sort of an anxiety or a I don't even know how to really define emotion, but there's something that you don't talk about enough, right? Because I dropped out, and it's cool to be messing about when you're 21, 22, but when you're hitting like 24, 25, 26, and other people are getting normal jobs, there's a moment where it's sort of all or nothing, where you're like, okay, if this doesn't work, then did I make the wrong decision? So I think at that age, there's also I'm the word entrepreneur always triggers like a bit of cringe, but that moment where you're like, oh, okay, this is now the path I chose, and if this doesn't work, the other path isn't that easily available anymore. And I think there's a bit of shame to, especially in Europe, to go, it didn't work if you start your own thing. Like the Americans are the serial entrepreneur and you're celebrated even if you fail. I think in our cultures, that's not really the case. So it also it became, yeah, this has to work. So it goes in a few years' times, it goes from this is fun, this is better than having a real job. We get to muck about and make cool stuff. You're hiring people that are dependent on you being able to make payroll every month. You're 25, 26, and if this doesn't work, it's sort of this moment of shame, and you might not be able to catch up in the other path anymore. So it definitely became more existential at a certain moment.
Yeah. I mean, do you think some of that stems from your childhood? You know, obviously you were saying you when you went to that school and you started seeing the differences in the kids and you know you thought, well, I want a bit of this. This is do you think your sort of ambition, like your competitiveness as you spoke about earlier, do you think it was born out of that kind of era in your life?
Yeah, I think so. Like I think I'm, yeah, can be competitive sometimes at a slightly unhealthy level. I think I've become better at it, but there's definitely I guess, let me show you element to it.
So do you still keep in touch with the friends that you grew up with way back in the day?
No, and that's not me suddenly being fancy or Porsche. It was just work. Like I didn't take a holiday, I think, for 13, 14 years. And you slowly start drifting away because you're not making the birthday or the parties because you're working. Um, so yeah, it's some of that is coming back now, but I was the worst, I think, friend for 15 years because of work.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is, when you do your own thing to the scale that you've done it, you know, something's got to give. And so obviously you made your choice that it was work. And I think, you know, to your point earlier, I think it probably was the right decision.
Yeah, I mean, maybe like I think and not put myself in that sphere, but I think there was an interview with the Airbnb guy, Brian Chesky, I think his name is, and he had a whole piece about that where you sort of become, yeah, you become sort of a bad friend and to an extent family member because of the trade-off, and then there's if it works, and I guess if it works is about money, then it's still a question if that trade-off was the correct one, but you can't change it, right? So I
Yeah.
think sometimes try and make up for it after and be more present and more involved and yeah, more social.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. And you know, the other thing that I think makes a lot of sense throughout this narrative is that, you know, I firmly believe that your background has really set you up to be successful, you know, and I've said that kind of a few times, I've sort of alluded to that. Like, what do you think, you know, given the fact that you did grow up working class, you didn't have loads, so you weren't, don't get me wrong, you weren't destitute, right? But you didn't have the riches.
Yeah.
But what do you think it is about class people, sorry, that yeah, that working class people that help you become who you are today?
Yeah, I think there's just a bit of grit and resilience and that like there's something to and I think you'll probably have similar things in Glasgow and other cities. There's if you think about what it means to be from Amsterdam and Amsterdammer, there's a bit of bluff and ego and confidence involved. So I think that combined with a bit of a chip on your shoulder, it sort of helps you because a lot of this, like a lot of this is a bit of luck and a bit of blagging through a moment here and there, right? And I think that maybe sometimes is what you are forced to do if you're from that situation, and then yeah, you sort of you you blag your way through it until it's true, pretty much, right? And that sort of feeling of chip on your shoulder, I'm going to show people, combined with some of the city's sort of, I guess, history around what it means to be from here, I think definitely helped.
Yeah, fake it till you make it. I think that's it's a good motto, and actually, it's the truth, isn't it? If you say it enough, you'll believe it, and everyone else will believe it. But you know, they don't have to believe it for you. You've made it, and I'm sure, as you say, your family are, you know, are ultimately proud. And to sort of close us out, then, is there any advice you would give to other people, people coming through that think, do you know, I'm in a bit of a quandary. I don't come from much. I don't have a silver spoon. You know, how should they grow and develop to achieve their own dreams?
And this is like there's a massive knowledge survivor bias in this. I honestly like you can't underestimate the luck. Like the company probably was bust, close to being bust at least 3 or 4 times. There were so many moments in that journey. I think if you would play it out a million times, I think that we're in the top 1% of how it could potentially play out. So I'm also very um, aware of the luck involved and just the right timing. But I do think the what you tend to have, I think, at least what I've always recognized uh, from your sort of cohort is you have a thing you control, which is working hard. And I think sometimes people underestimate what it just means to show up every single day, start earlier, stop later, um, repeated effort in a direction is almost impossible to compete with for people that don't put in the same amount of effort. And I think effort is something that you control. And to be honest, there's probably studies and stats on it that you might have more bandwidth for it if you come from a lower class background because you've probably seen more of it. So yeah, that to me, Victor actually had that always. He said people can be smarter, but they're not going to outwork us. Right? That was sort of our motto, our mantra. And yeah, it's a thing you control. And I think, especially if you're starting your own company, there's lots of things you can't control. So you have to be the very best at the thing you can control. And I think your own effort and energy and mindset are extremely powerful, and they can put you ahead of where it feels like you've started. Right? You can make it a level playing field, and maybe you're actually ahead because of some of the instincts and DNA that you have because of your background.
Well, the thing that's for sure is that certainly I don't think it's changed you as a person. I think you're still as humble, I imagine, humble then as you are today. Obviously, you've made it now. You've proven that it can be done, and the underdog story is come true. So thank you so much. I really appreciate this. I think loads of people will be, certainly people from Media Monks, I think they've probably learned a few things that they didn't know already. So thank you for sharing it with me.
Excellent. Yeah, lovely chat. And the way you're framing it, we talked about this a bit in Cannes. Well, we can now say we talked about it in Cannes, right? And it was, I thought it was a really interesting way to think about some of the journeys people are making to celebrate that background, because I do think there's a lot of value to it, which is worth talking about more.
Thank you.